Hey everyone, it's Will GamerDad with another video for you. So in today's video, we're going to tackle on all 4 stages of the Electric Shadow mystery, and these feature all the horrors and bosses from IDA's parts 1, 2, and 3. My son actually said, "Dad, can you beat everything with just Eva?" And so I decided to take on I'll say a mild challenge. It really shouldn't be too difficult. The normal stages are really as an entry point and an introduction to the battle simulator boss rush stages, and so it's not something to be extremely proud of. However, it is really fun to kind of experiment with lesser teams and just see how far you can get with just the minimum requirements. Obviously, Eva is top of the line DPS and one of the newest units out there. Also was a global first, and so the devs definitely put a little bit more effort and power into her. In this case, we only have the very minimum requirements in our party. Jade is required, and Eva does all the work here. So the video is going to be very, very similar. We're always going to do our first turn AF, cast Glacial Veil, and then cast Icicle Surge for max stacks of int and speed. And depending if there's multiple enemies, you can either use Icicle Surge and they'll individually target if it one-shot kills. Otherwise, you can use Astro Drago and they'll fly over and drop Dragon Bombs on the enemies and finish off the boss. Okay, in the next stage, you do have to have, Saki, and I won't really talk about Saki versus Jade because if you haven't done the IDA, there are some connections between the two, so just watch for that if you haven't already. And it also is fun to kind of reintroduce and use some of these IDA characters. First of all, the Future Missiles features a lot of these in the storyline. And secondly, let's be honest, we don't use these on our fighting teams in general unless you're really just tinkering around and having a little bit of fun with it. So it is nice to kind of reintroduce some of these characters back into my party and into my roster for some of the fights. I know they're not really doing much, but still, just the fact that we have them in the party, it kind of reminds us that we have quite a comprehensive roster. And not only that, remember that Jade and Saki are actually free. And so Jade, I remember when I side graded him to 5-star, he was actually still quite good. He actually isn't even a bad unit at this point. He can do stackable power down. He can do essentially Lance Prayer that gives all Lance units 50% extra damage. He can guaranteed set pain with his 1 Blaze Lance. Yeah, he's actually quite good. Now, Saki AS unfortunately isn't really as good. I think even when she came out, she was really on the weaker side. Doesn't really have too much in the way of offense, and no guaranteed heals as a mage either. But that being said, hopefully they come up with a manifest or something like her, because the fights back in the day for the Cradle system to get her were challenging, to say the least. Alright, so you can see pretty easy clears with Eva stage 1 and 2, and this one now requires mana, which is another free character that you get actually from IDA 3. So I think they went in order. I think Jade came first, Saki came separately kind of thing, and then so on and so forth. Or maybe I got it wrong. But that being said, okay, with mana, we actually have a few more strategies, and I will actually say that mana is actually quite a useful unit as a free unit. She does have that Crown of Gaiet, which increases int speed and power for everybody on both sides. She's kind of like a double-edged sword. But if you're boosting only your side and you're killing off the waves, then those buffs on the enemy disappear, and it just stays on your side, which is great. So you can see that we got triple buff on Eva, as well as on mana, of course, and of course with Icicle Sword, she still has the 4 stacks there. You also have things like Mephistophelies and Queen of Hearts. Those can actually increase power or int by 35% while flipping it around and minus 35%. So if you use, for example, an all-mage team, you'll use the Mephistophelies that increase the int by 35, and fighting physical enemies, physical fighting enemies, the minus 35 really helps. And Queen of Hearts, it's the opposite. You put it on a physical team, and then you kind of wreck any mages. So very, very useful in the early to mid-game stages, and even in some end-game fights against the Manifest and so on and so forth. Now, one other thing she does have is the Midnight Sundrian actually, which removes buffs and debuffs from both sides, which is also very useful, similar to the banished mechanic as Grasta. Now, in this final wave, Mother does have to kill off, you have to kill off the 2 orbs which kind of protect Mother before you can attack Mother directly, and if you don't kill them off and you just target Mother as a single target, it will counter your attack and hit you. So be aware that in later waves of this kind of fight, you will have to accommodate for that. Otherwise, you will get wiped out by Mother. And I remember she was actually a relatively tough fight in IDA 3. If you didn't shield yourself enough to get mana, Mother could really wreak havoc on your party, especially given the limited 5 stars available at that time, since IDA 3 came out relatively early. Okay, so in stage 4 of normal, you do have to bring at least 2 IDA characters. Now, spoiler alert, 7 does have a 5-star coming later on in chapter 7, I believe, of the Future Mythos. So I wanted to bring him in, and being that he's actually a staff holder, he can actually be a Grasta holder for Eva, which is actually quite nice. And we're still using Crown of Gaiet from Mana, since it does require 2 IDA characters anyways, and so we might as well take the ones that we can use to our advantage. Note that I'm not necessarily hitting anything with weakness using Astro Drago. The thing is, she can still use that, and being that these bosses are not resistant to Crystal, I believe they're also not resistant to Shade, you really can use either Crystal or Shade AoEs to wipe out the enemies. Now, 7 isn't really doing much, and as a 4-star, he's really slow. But the good thing about him being slow is, and especially if you understand the fighting mechanic, if he's slow, he will act after the boss. And in this case, he actually has a piece of gear or badge called Fresh Heal Badge, which allows him to have a heal move. And being that Eva is mainly used as a DPS, and let's be honest, Mana doesn't really have a heal. She has a regen from the practical, which increases physical resistance by 35%. You can kind of try to use both of those moves in conjunction to kind of keep the levels of Eva and the team high enough so you don't get one-shotted by anything, being that we're still fooling around and just bringing the absolute minimum team. Again, you can cast a Fresh Heal. And I will say that the badges and Grasta system, especially if you haven't really tinkered with it and you're relatively newer to the game, are perfect ways to kind of customize your unit. I call it GMOing, especially if you're starting to add extra moves or extra kind of abilities. However, I guess, you know, the game does allow for modification, and it's heavier and heavier modification, which is really nice, because say you had a 5-star and you don't really want to use any of the moves, or one of the moves is relatively useless. If that person's mainly as a support and not as a DPS, you can equip one of those Grasta or badges and add certain moves to your team in order for it to kind of customize to your liking. So again, Eva is pretty standard. I did change it to the Power Benefique to get 5 turns of Lunatic instead of 3, allowing her to last all the way through this short fight. Mana same as before, and 7 is a Grasta holder. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.